It's working. Okay.
That's your Siri voice, your Abby.
It's working. Mm-hmm. So something that's been really interesting is that when we first started the podcast, we would record like a week before we launched the podcast.
You're giving them the inside scoop here.
And now it's Wednesday and it's out tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is going to be a little bit of a quicker episode. We're rushed, but
yeah, but that's because life happens and
life does.
we lead busy lives.
We're working girls.
We're not making money off of this.
No. We're bouncing around
Yet.
constantly, job to job, appointment to appointment.
Mm-hmm.
We need calendars.
Yeah, we have schedules. So anyway, this week we're doing it very à la minute.
Ooh, I love that. You know, I've actually been incorporating like a little bit. I've been wanting to incorporate just like little French isms because I've been reading Van Gogh's letters and he's always just like doing a little phrase in French here or in English
just
there.
showing it off.
I mean, I'm reading it in English, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always quite fun. I mean, some people think it's pretentious, but
no, it's cute.
I think it's cool when you can borrow different like little isms from other languages because sometimes English doesn't have the capacity to express what you want.
No, you and borrowing from other languages is also just like expansive for the mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Arrival, anybody?
Yes. Whoa.
Yeah.
We love that movie. Yeah, that's a good one.
All right, speaking of expanding the mind, today we're talking about perspective.
Great segue.
And that's just like kind of the general concept of perspective in art. So in case you're unaware, honestly, like one of the great things about reading these two articles was getting a little bit more of like a timeline of how perspective unfolded in my head. Like I really thought that Galileo was born earlier than he is.
Well, isn't it crazy? Like, have you ever seen those timelines where they actually like show you when things happen?
Oh yeah, like the Cleopatra lived closer to McDonald's than she did to the pyramids.
Exactly.
That's true.
And I think for me, I had the same because I mean, I knew that all of this was happening around the same time, but I liked that one of the articles focuses on really the invention of perspective and the Italian kind of movement.
Yeah.
And then I liked the second article and how it talks more about kind of the Northern European, the Flemish, and what they kind of used to...
what they adapted.
Yeah,
and how
exactly.
And perfected it, honestly. Like, listen.
And also, took
the
it
Dutch.
a step further.
Yes.
So I think that's... We'll definitely get into that.
We will.
I also wanted to quickly ask, why did you want to talk about perspective this week? Because we alternate. I mentioned this. We alternate in topics, and we all get to suggest one and then the other. So
I wanted to talk about perspective because honestly, like when I pitched it, I thought we could do sort of like a timeliney thing, or that's how the structure of this episode would unfold, because I thought it would be interesting to just sort of like have an art history episode. Yeah. And to some extent we do have that, but I'm really interested in the like interpretations of perspective that both of our articles reference, because mine is definitely like more the scientific invention of perspective and how you do achieve that in a painting, versus yours was more like how can perspective be used to investigate like your inner world. So like actually change your perspective.
That's very well phrased. For me, when I think of perspective, I start thinking about space and mimicking space, and artists creating space for something, for an idea, for a character, for, well, anything really. And I think it's interesting how in the first article, which we can maybe now name. So that was your article. Do you want to introduce it?
My article is a chapter from a book that I've had for a very long time called Art and Physics. So I actually have it here. She's a big boy, very thick.
She reads.
When I first got this book, I was like 14, 15.
What? No. That's subtle flex.
No. It took me like 5 years to read the whole thing in totality. Honestly, not the most academic book. It's interesting. The author isn't an art historian or a scientist or a mathematician, but rather a doctor in California who just kind of had a bunch of time on his hands, I guess.
This is his passion project.
And he decided to syncretize sort of like the idea that different art movements in history align with scientific discoveries sort of along the same timeline, like and how they relate to each other. So if anything, it's mostly just like a book that's interesting and potentially will give you new ideas, but it's not peer reviewed in any way. So just want to give that disclaimer. It's just fun mostly. The science is all right, but the chapter that I chose is the one that he writes about perspective, and the scientific discovery that was happening at the same time was actually kind of like figuring out that the Earth isn't the center of the universe. So that's definitely related to perspective ideologically at the very least. And he actually at one point in this chapter posits that it wouldn't have been possible, like by having perspective, the art form, it opened the scientific mind to the possibility of like perceiving the universe from a different vantage point than on the Earth, focusing instead as the vantage point on the sun, and then suddenly like it just all makes sense why the planets move the way that they do, and a lot of observations suddenly just kind of click.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. I think drawing a parallel between the two developments, because I do think they are very much intertwined, and I think art can reflect what's happening in a society, because sometimes we think about these scientific breakthroughs as, well, now, I mean, it's obvious, of course we revolve around the sun, but I think back then it was blasphemy to say something like that. And so that's also something that I think artists at the time would have been aware of. They would have been aware of how the church played such a major role in shaping the thoughts of the society. And indeed, with perspective also comes this humanist turn. It's something that they also talk about. Yeah. So if you're reading along, it's around page 63, 64, they talk about how even, when we think about Michelangelo's David, this like secular hero, it's no longer a sculpture of God or of Zeus. We now have a man being venerated, and the man has become the vantage point from which everything else,
a weak man as well.
A weak man at that. So I thought that was really interesting, and I never thought about it that way, because I always thought of perspective as something very just geometric and technological. But there is this whole like humanist side to it as well. And it was the same humanism that then inspired people like Da Vinci to really look at like the body and the materiality of the body and break it and separate it from God and religion, and,
break it down into its individual parts.
Parts. So I loved that. That was, well summarized, I thought, in the article.
Okay, great. Yeah. Also, I was saying earlier that like, by reading these articles, I started to get a better timeline. And I wonder actually if I've never heard anyone talk about this, but I wonder if part of why the church was so opposed to Galileo putting forth that the Earth was not the center of the universe was because it was just a few decades after the Reformation, so after the split in the Christian church between Roman Catholicism and Protestantism. This happened like 50 years later. You have Galileo saying, no, actually more like a century later, you have Galileo saying the Earth revolves around the sun. And so like,
or he developed that idea, because Copernicus introduced it.
He did develop it. He got a lot more evidence for it. But like, maybe the Catholic Church was, we can't afford to look like we don't know what's up right now.
Absolutely.
So that might have like been part of why it was so heretical, not just because it's not what the book in the Bible says. But
I know it's crazy. I mean, I was reading an article about near-death experiences, which is so fascinating. I think if you want to go down a good rabbit hole, just look at some of they've done like massive kind of scientific inquiries into NDEs, and the experiences that people have coming out of one. And there's so many similarities. A lot of them describe having this like playback on, you know, looking back at your life, and they describe this feeling of warmth and peace and this light, but it's a very different experience than what is articulated in, you know, a very kind of dogmatic, you know, Christian view or any, I mean, perhaps it's closer to something like Buddhism than other religions.
Well, a lot of people also say that like Jesus, when a lot of his teachings are very similar to Eastern teachings.
Yeah.
But then they get warped by the human influence of the church.
Yeah. And I think also I find it so fascinating how when you know, walk into a church, or maybe you grow up in a religious environment, like those things aren't really talked about at all, when I would think perhaps they would serve as even more evidence for certain religion. You know, it's very interesting how religions are very specific in what they accept into the dogma and what they don't. And even, you know, with Pope Francis, when he said, R.I.P. dogs get to go to heaven and gay people too, and people were like, what? He's departing from like the scripture and our beliefs. And this is very similar, you know, saying something like, well, perhaps this is more scientific, you know, there's a heliocentric model, and that was just completely like neglected and not accepted.
Thousands of years. Like we knew the earth was round before we knew that we weren't the center of the universe.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, at the same time, that's not something I could have discovered, so I can't judge. Like, I would not be the person that's like, wait, something's not adding up. I would just be like, of course it's flat. At some point you fall off. Like I would totally be one of those people if it wasn't taught to me.
Yeah. And if you just lived in the same place your whole life and you saw the horizon off the water, like that ends. Definitely.
Yeah, of course. So let's also give grace to those who
Lots of grace. Oh, that's so well put. Yes.
They didn't know any better.
No.
And maybe we also don't know any better.
I always hate this like fallacy that we fall into of thinking that people in the past weren't as intelligent or you know, didn't have the same emotional range or capacity that we have now. Like there's just this bias that people in the present, in any present, always have against the past, that like, oh well, we have to be better than them.
And we always look back, you know, towards the older generation and think, oh, they just don't know what they're doing. They're so backwards, they're so conservative, and then one day you become that.
I know.
Or how they say
you gotta fight
you become your parents.
Ooh. I love that quote from The Breakfast Club. It's inevitable.
Ooh, yeah. What's also inevitable is death. Because I was gonna link it to the next article.
It's really good if you've already read Abby's article. All right, shoot, pitch it, go.
So my article is about memento mori, which is the reminder of death, and trompe l'œil, which is the trick of the eye that artists developed using techniques of perspective to essentially create a type of painting where you would have a skull, for example, or something rotting. And during the late 15th century, it was a lot of Netherlandish, Flemish art became very obsessed with the idea of transient time and the human body decaying. And on the one hand, there was this celebration of human faculties, and that's something we see also in the Renaissance, of course, with the Renaissance man and this kind of glorification of all of the things that humans can do. And I find it so interesting that becomes contrasted with, but don't forget, you will also die. And there's this, you know, hubris that we should avoid. We should never think that we're, you know, just invincible.
Yeah.
We will also succumb to the passage of time. And yeah, so the paintings that are highlighted in this article called Vanitas and Trompe l'œil
range from like the 1400s through the 1600s. It's sort of what your article covers, and in the north, in the Netherlands mostly.
And I really recommend taking a look at the images are beautiful.
The images are stunning.
She's done a great job selecting just a great body of work and good examples as well.
I was really impressed by the difference. So we have a painting from 1450 by Roger van der Weyden, which is one of these Veritas paintings of the skull, compared with a 1480 painting just 30 years later. The perspective and the like trompe l'oeil, the trickery of the eye, is so improved just in this small 30-year period. It's very impressive.
It's very impressive. I liked this article as well because I think it's also something that we need to take, we need to assess this in the time that it was made. So you would have had, let's say, like a triptych or an altarpiece. And a lot of these pieces were commissioned for families or for individuals. So you would have, for example, on one panel, the family crest. And then on the other panel, you would have
the Veritas, the skull.
Yeah, the skull. And it was a reminder, you can be nobility, you can be this important person in society, but you too will die. But why the trompe l'oeil? Why was the use of perspective so important here? And I think that's something that she investigates in this article.
Yeah. So it took me a little bit of effort to wrap my brain around it, because there's a whole section that just sort of talks about trompe l'oeil as an artist practice and as vocabulary, because it means like to trick the eye, and it's sometimes used in architectural pieces to like make a room look bigger than you actually think it is. So that's on a really large scale. But then the scale that we're talking about for these Veritas paintings is more intimate, so that it's small paintings, it's in books, it's this, so it's not quite trompe l'oeil in that it's a sustained trick of the eye, but rather the human brain is able to tell that it isn't actually reality, but it's good enough that we have to sort of think about it and consider how did they do that, how did they trick us, what did it take, and why is it that like I'm being tricked by this? Yeah. Like questioning yourself is a lot of what this article gets into.
And also, why were artists interested in having an object seemingly spill out of the painting?
Yeah.
And create that three-dimensional element.
Breaking of the fourth wall.
Yeah, breaking the fourth wall, truly. Because you have to imagine, and if you're watching it on YouTube, you'll see some examples, but it really looks like the skull is protruding from the frame.
Yeah.
And in doing that, it kind of invades the viewer space. And I think that's kind of this reckoning of, oh, death will come for me. So I think it's a very intentional, technical style that has been used to kind of create that extra impact, right? And what you were saying as well, like it forces the reader to contemplate what death actually is, what's coming. And I think, it's also another part on page 70 is when she talks about, on the one hand, we know that it's not a real object. So that could perhaps be a compliment to our, let's say, ability as humans to recognize what's real from what's not. But at the same time, because we are slightly tricked, it also shows the limits of our physical and cognitive ability. So there's this celebration of knowing 2D from 3D, but there's also, because of that hesitation, we are also limited, and we are not as grand or as
it's that humility that we were talking about with the memento mori. Yeah. Except in this instance, it's like introducing a willingness to question yourself. Yeah. And to question whether or not your perspective is the only perspective. Yes. And don't be limited by that. I also think going more into like the like science of perspective, how you achieve perspective. There's a great graphic in my article that's about like the pyramid. So like I'll put it up here. So you have the perspective now places the viewer who's looking at the painting at the center of the painting, because it's since we are standing and looking at it that the perspective makes sense and has the dimension that perspective then gives. And then taking that and transplanting it onto this article and transplanting it onto this article.
I love it.
Is that what is being challenged here or what this style of art is challenging is that perhaps you as the viewer, your perspective is what has to be questioned.
I like that.
Yeah.
I think, and I was getting the sense that that's also what she was getting at.
Mm-hmm.
I think you summarized it quite well, because it's a very abstract thought. It's about not only, because as you said, perspective is about centering the human eye, because I'm perceiving something, and it's the way that it's three-dimensional is through my line of sight. But with the memento mori, with the skull, with vanitas, it's basically reminding us you can perceive this alive. Your eyesight, or the ability of you to view this artwork is also very much transient. You will not be able to do this forever. So I love this idea of like time. And also there was, let me try to find it. One of the translations underneath, well, one of the skulls that she has selected is actually separated. The jaw is separated from the top of the skull. And that was also to remind that specific viewer, or that the man who commissioned it or owned it, like, you will not be able to speak forever. You will not be able to enjoy food forever. And it is such a like powerful thing, like, whoa. And also, of course, the missing eyes from the skull, like, you will not be able to gaze upon art forever. And
that was something I loved in your article, actually. So when it does start getting more into like perspective in the second half of it, one of the things it says is that there's this shift visually where some of these Veritas images, the skull is just sort of like on its side, or, it's almost a 3D study. So it's from the side, or it's not looking directly at you. And then you have a shift in the Veritas where they start looking directly at the viewer. So it's almost supposed to be like a mirror, so that you are looking at a mirror of yourself, but it's yourself in the future with your dead skull.
Whoa.
Yeah.
This is, I was also thinking, reading this article, like, I was like, this is so punk. Like, this is so ahead of its time in so many ways. And it actually fascinates me that, for me, this is also quite profane. It's a very kind of raw, like, desecration of the human body. And like, it's so interesting to me that this was very accepted also into kind of the religious dogma of the time.
But, again, going back to, like, let me theorize here, with the Reformation being, like, Protestants were in the north and Catholics were in the south. This is still before the Reformation happens, which is 1517, but it's leading up to it, and I'm not surprised that this style is taking off more in the north than it is the south, also because it's putting the perspective, the cojones, on the viewer and not on the church. You're no longer being told what to think about death. It's not someone saying this is what death is like. It's rather you are having your own personal reflection on your life, which is very Protestant.
It's no surprise that your personal relation to death also becomes your personal relationship to God. And I think it's a very powerful way of engaging people in that form of contemplation. It's, it's not, as you said, I love that how you phrased it, like, the church isn't telling you what to think about death. Because, oh, by the way, like, before the Reformation, you would have gone to mass and it was all in Latin. Like, if you weren't learned enough
to know Latin, then you didn't really know what they were saying.
Of course. And so you would really look at a lot of the artwork, and that's what, told the story of Jesus. And that's how and I also think if you look at some of the depictions of hell that were also popular at that time, it's very fascinating how I think a skull.
She's got those calendar notifications on.
Yep, don't mind me.
Busy woman, I wouldn't let you come into my calendar at night. Hey.
Exactly.
I have to show you my photos from Sabrina Carpenter, actually.
Yeah. Wait, because how have you not
I got some film photos back.
Oh.
Hot.
Where was I heading with this? Showing a skull is different than showing like a Bosch depiction of hell.
Yeah.
Those two things have very different impacts.
It's more mundane. It's personal. It's a reality. It's not the eternal life or eternal suffering. It's humility again, bringing it back to that. Yeah.
Hello. Your body is just made up of matter, and you're, you know, at the end of the day, back to the earth we go. And
there's some, I'm gonna get the science wrong, but basically it's this whole like scientifically with how atoms work. Every sip of water that you have has atoms in it from like the time that Jesus was alive. Like Jesus drank the same water that you drank,
of course,
as part of it. And like the air that we breathe is also the same air. Like it's all recycled, and our body is stars. I don't remember why I started talking about this.
That really reminds me of like that era of Tumblr where it was like, how did the universe come up with you? Or like, you are made of stardust.
Gosh, blushing.
I swear.
Wait, speaking of Tumblr, one of the first things that I thought when we were talking, when you sent me your article and I saw it was about Memento Mori, was John Green.
Oh my
because
God.
John Green loves Memento Mori. Either him or somebody that he's talked about before in the, you know, millions of hours he has. He knew somebody, or he used to sign his emails Memento Mori. Like, just casual.
I can't tell if I'm like, if I find that cringy or if I find that, or is both or poetic. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And something your article reminds us is that Memento Mori isn't just remember that you will die, but then the natural extension of like being conscious and aware of your death is to take full enjoyment of your life.
Yeah. And by the way, get some perspective.
It all comes back around, ladies.
So I think actually both of the articles, as different as they are, they do tie into a similar kind of realm. And I think they very much complement each other in the sense that, okay, the one looks more at the scientific developments that were happening at the time, but the other also at kind of the cultural shifts away from the authority of the church and more towards, you know, contemplation and your own personal relationship with these broader themes. And yeah, I mean, I would really recommend, if you're listening, like take a look at some of these artworks. They are really incredible.
You can find all of the articles up on Patreon.
Yes, you can find them there. Yeah, I'm surprised that some of these haven't gone viral on like Instagram, because they are really, really
beautiful images.
Yeah.
And also, when I sent you the initial like text, I was very impressed how realistic the paintings, even from like the 1400s, coming out of the Netherlands and more like the Flemish area, they don't have perfect perspective, but they look beautiful.
Yeah.
Like there's just this mastery of Dutch draftsmanship that I don't see in Italian paintings in the same way. Like you want a Dutch person to draw a building. If you want a building drawn, Dutch.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the also like the church interiors of like Emmanuel de Witte, and it's a bit later, and
that's more 1600s.
But once they figure out perspective, I mean, people run with it, and you get really beautiful work and very technical work as well. And again, like a lot of this art was not only about making space in your own mind to contemplate certain issues like death, but also inviting the viewer to step into another world.
The painting that does that possibly the best in your article is the Hans Holbein of Jean de Denteville and George de Selve. Oh, it's called The Ambassadors.
You could have just said The Ambassadors.
There we go. And if you see it, there's this like weird kind of carpet on the ground that doesn't really fit in with the rest of the painting. And the idea is that you're supposed to walk to the side of it, so you're almost viewing the painting like from the side, and then it's an eye trickery so that you suddenly see that it comes into view as a skull. And this is again the idea that perspective is reliant on the location of the viewer rather than intrinsic to the art itself.
And the fun part about The Ambassadors is that it's two men standing next to these treasures that they've probably collected from some of their expeditions.
Yeah,
abroad.
A lot of travel materials, like mapping, cartography.
Exactly. And then the skull kind of reminds the viewer, oh, but this too, these human material, you know, these trinkets. I mean, all of these things are also, you know, don't forget, you're still gonna, like, that's like, just, I think that's so powerful. Like, yeah, we can all be ambitious and change the world or not, but we all meet the same fate.
Yeah.
And this is not in a nihilistic, well, you can interpret it in a positive way or a negative way. I think it's also,
it's better to move through the world interpreting it in a positive way. It's not that none of it matters. It's that none of that matters. Isn't that great?
Enjoy.
Yeah.
Enjoy life.
And enjoy this episode.
And go after your dreams, because
we're just gonna start
nothing. You have nothing to lose.
Really, there is these days nothing to lose. Check out our last episode on fascism.